to let you guys jump in here from the waiting room. We appreciate everybody who's giving your time and your space to us in these next 2 hours. I am so thrilled to be able to have the group on today that I have with me. It is an extraordinary panel that I am very confident will shift your awareness of the topics that we have at hand and will bring not just a lot of understanding, but also a lot of hope. There's just a real sense of exuberance in my life the last 2 days, because we all got to get together on Tuesday, 2 days ago, and experience each other's, arcs of our stories, our careers, and everything else. And it has lit my spirit in a deep way because it seems to be the opposite and equal energy to the overall depressive energy that has been upon humanity these last couple of years. And so I'm delighted to bring you a group of humans that will forge new hope in you. And we recognize that a lot of the energy that flows through each of these global health education events comes from you. Each of you are participating in a village. You guys are participating in a global family, community, whatever you want to throw to it, a global group of human beings that are coming into alignment, certainly around some topics. But if you look across the scope of global health education and what we've covered, from the virome to death to heart disease to what we have today in the mental health crisis, the seemingly disparate pieces of information that you have been picking up on throughout is not actually what's kept you riveted to this, and you sharing this with your community and growing our global community each time. Every time we do this, there's 6,000 new people that tend to join us. And so it's just thrilling to see that global community growing at such a pace because of each of you feeling a deep conviction and feeling something deep inside of you that brings you into alignment. And I think that thing is actually, in its mechanism, a frequency. I think there's a frequency of resonance that is coming through the information that has flowed through me, and perhaps at moments, but more so through these panels, through Seraphic Group, which is my parent company. As you got 85 people throwing themselves fully into this every single day to bring the highest messaging, the highest hope into humanity. And for that, I think you are attracted. And so while the information today is going to bless you and I think bring you into a new space of thought on some of these topics that are so salient and present in each of our lives, I think that it's going to do something even more miraculous, which is bring you into coherence with what you already know. Deep inside of you is a North Star. There's a soul within you that knows why you signed up right now, the tipping point of all things, to be part of this human experiment and to shift generational beliefs, generational understandings that served us for a period of time to get to this moment that we're in. And I think we are being called to make a leap, to make a huge surrender to everything that was before, giving gratitude to the journey, even in the brokenness of humanity, giving gratitude to the extractive, destructive chapter that we just lived through, that was maybe our toddler years or our terrible threes or whatever it was in our childhood as a species. We're getting to this maturation point of total release from that chapter. And none of us have ever held a 3-year-old responsible for their temper tantrums, in the sense that we understand them as part of the journey. And so I hope that we look back in the next couple hundred years to understand that we are actually on the perfect journey. And for all of the destructive, awful things that we do to each other and have done to the earth, we're going to find out that those were iterations of the journey that would be necessitated for us to find our highest path. And I think that mental health has become one of those most poignant aspects of my medical career that has shaped my understanding of that reality. My closest, colleagues and friends have impacted my life in massive ways, but my patients who have struggled with decades of mental health have taught me so much more than any medical education could have ever taught me. These patients of mine, one of them was one of my very first patients as a physician 20 years ago. I picked her up in my clinic, just a primary care clinic, as an internal medicine resident, brand new doctor. And I have been on a journey with her to find herself back to self out of an initial drug regimen that was 33 medications, 16 of which were centrally acting drugs to treat things like attention deficit, sleep disorders, psychosis, you name the thing. She had been diagnosed with absolutely everything in the book. This woman now is only on 3 medications, 2 of which are natural hormones, including her thyroid hormone. But that journey back to a nature within her has revealed to me the intelligence of the minds that are tortured by mental health. There's a distinct brilliance to the minds that are most tortured in our society. And I think there is a distinct courage and beauty in the souls that are tortured by these conditions. And it makes sense that those that would be most aware, most tuned in to the dissonance between the common narrative that they're experiencing in human society and their soul knowingness, those that are most tuned into that will be the ones most tortured by the current human journey. And so let's make space for the possibility that if you are somebody who is suffering with major depression right now, psychosis, deep sleep disorders, any of the diagnoses we come up with today and mention in passing or whatever it is, we know that some of you are right there in that moment and it's become your life. This is your daily experience in these conditions. And I just want to recognize that as somebody who is suffering, you are likely experiencing that because you are aware, you are here, and you are present enough to know that there is deep disconnect between who you are and what the world is telling you you are. And so I want to honor you for the discomfort, for the stretch that you're feeling right now, and for the amount of effort that you put into every day to stay with us, to stay present, to keep coming back to the table, knowing you're going to feel depressed, knowing you're going to feel hopeless, knowing you're going to have that skin crawling anxiety under the surface, and you keep showing up. We're here to be part of your community. We're here to give some light to what's maybe going on in your life and how you can maybe reframe that to start a journey out of your suffering. But I don't want to pretend like your suffering is a low vibration state. It may be our most important step is the suffering. And it's a symptom of this stretch between who you are at the soul and what you've been told you are. And we want to let you surrender what you've been told you are and step fully with confidence into your intrinsic wellness, into your intrinsic sense of self and your North Star within you that is telling you a new direction, telling you a new path that's going to let go and surrender all of the titles of all the disorders that we touch on today. They're words that describe a human experience. They are not an identity. And so I invite you to let go of the identity that comes with diagnoses of the mental health deeper than almost any other condition out there. People say, I have cancer, but people say, I am depressed. That is an ownership, that is an identity that you take on with mental health that is deeper ingrained and more dangerous, I think, and insidious in its ability to diffuse your power, diffuse who you are. But I honor you for that moment because it's showing you to be a sentient being that's willing to be in that space of discomfort at the rebirth of humanity, at the rebirth and opening of consciousness on maybe a new level in the human structure, in the planetary vibration that we live within. And so at no point do I want you to hear something in this and feel like you are distant from the solution, that you have some long journey to go. Wherever you are in the journey is exactly where you should be at the moment. And it's through reconnection to community. And I hope that this panel starts to open up that in you and reconnect you to a sense of self that brings hope. The community that I have been studying for the last 12, 15 years deeply is the community of the microbiome within your bodies. And it is fascinating over the last 10 years that through the incredible advancements in our ability to run genetic sequence analysis of every part of your body, we find out that every niche and cranny of your biology is crammed full of non-human stuff. And I find it beautiful and fascinating that the way in which your body works is only through community, only through this specialization of hyperintelligence that happens through this quorum sensing phenomenon, where when you reach a certain level of biodiversity within your body, you start to function at that hyper state that we would call consciousness, or we would call knowledge or wisdom. It is being brought to you by an invisible community of microbes, bacteria, fungi, viruses that are intelligently working with your design. There are 10 to the 15 viruses in my bloodstream right now. And my body is taking every opportunity, every cell in my 10 to the 15, tens of billions of different viruses are in my body right now. And every cell in my body is making a distinct decision each day. Is this a genetic update that I need? More than 50% of the genes that have come from my mother and father to make me the physical body that I have today was inserted directly by a virus, updated into the genetic code of mammals, into the genetic code ultimately of Homo sapiens, to be expressed as perhaps the most intelligent and conscious species that's been here, or an iteration of it. What is the consciousness and wisdom of a blue whale? We don't know. We don't have the metrics to see into that exquisite connection with the divine, that connection to Mother Nature. And so I'm excited to introduce you today to the idea that depression, anxiety, all of these things are symptomatic of not your character, not who you are, not some weakness within you, but it's a simple result of isolation. And in that disconnect from the microbiome that has occurred over the last 30 years through the incredibly invasive encroachment of chemical agriculture into your food systems, we are now eating and breathing antibiotics on a daily basis in the form of glyphosate, 2,4-D, atrazine, goes down the list, the nicotinamides. We are literally saturating our food and our water systems and the air that we breathe with chemicals that destroy the ecosystem of our bodies and the soil systems that we eat from to create an isolation event. And in our laboratory, it's phenomenal to witness that as soon as those chemicals, the same ones that would kill the community, those same chemicals, when they touch the human biology, destroy our barrier system. And so in our lab, we've shown tens of thousands of times over the last decade that as soon as glyphosate, active ingredient in Roundup, most common herbicide on the planet, we pour 4 billion pounds of this chemical poison into our systems of soil, water, and air every year now. 4 billion pounds of a chemical that as soon as it touches the gut, the blood-brain barrier, kidney tubules, any of these critical barrier events in the human body that allow for our self-identity to occur, it destroys the barrier. And so we are eroding the barriers that allow us to know who we are. We dissolve that gut membrane and we start to lose the interface between our immune system and the outside world. And we start to combat everything. We get autoimmune disease. We are attacking our own bodies with our immune systems. We get environmental sensitivities. Gluten sensitivity was the first to emerge when we put glyphosate into our food in 1992 forward. But then we've got seasonal allergies and we've got food allergies of all sorts. And we have toxin sensitivities that never occurred before. Suddenly we have epidemics of things that we call Lyme disease and all these. It's all symptomatic of a loss of a boundary event where we started to lose our humanity through our chemical agriculture and food. And so I want you to know that your depression, your anxiety, your sleep disorder, your neurodegenerative condition, your psychosis, whatever you've been diagnosed with, is not you. It is the result of a dysfunction within a greater organism called biology on Earth. And your life, in a beautiful way, as much as it is a suffering way, perhaps at moments, in a beautiful way, you are a microcosm of Mother Earth herself. And I love that checks and balances, that we were designed within a system in which we will rise at the same rate that we co-create with Mother Earth. The more that we foster adaptation and biodiversity within our environments, whether it be the microorganisms in your backyard garden or the macro biodiversity at your dinner table. Are you inviting new people to the dinner table? Are you finding elders in your community to invite in to sit with you, give you and your children a new experience of biodiversity, of thought, of story? Listen into the stories of your community, listen into the stories around each table, make for something more interesting and more stimulating than another night with Netflix. Start to build back a dinner table in which food is shared for the purpose of storytelling, for the purpose of discovering something deeper in those around you. And for that, we already have a path to our future that we would all want. And so we are going to dive in here into this mental health topic with an understanding that disconnect from the micro and the macro, isolation ultimately being the worst and meta disease on the planet. We are going to look at how we can begin at that space and understanding how we came up with these phenomena and diagnoses, from addiction to mental health and all these things. We're going to take a look at the arc of the human experience. And to start that arc, I am so excited to introduce you to Dr. Nafisseh Soroudi. Nafisseh is a PhD within a dissertation that covered the journey of children diagnosed with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, and the chemical management of those kids through the pharmaceutical use of stimulants. It is just an honor for us to have you with us, Nafisseh. I am so grateful that you are such a wonderful friend to me and such a support to my journey. And I'm so grateful for you and this community to come together for them to be enriched by your wisdom. So thank you for joining us. Why don't you jump in and give us a little bit of sense of your journey with your career and everything else, and some of your favorite insights that you gleaned from that journey with the kids.
Sure. Thank you so much, Zach. It's an honor for me to be here. I've been following your work for several years now and doing my work on the side. And it's such a beautiful place for me to be able to share whatever wisdom that has come through me. So thank you. I am in the beautiful island of Kauai, as you can see in the background, and I feel so happy to be here. And it's been a conscious decision that I'll be talking about. So Zach, you talked about the modern approaches to medicine, and they have been able to alleviate many acute diseases, right? But as we can see, emotional suffering seems to be increasing. And it's in part, or maybe mostly, because of the ways in which we live our modern life, which it is out of harmony with nature. And so my background is in Western medicine, Western psychology, but over the years I've sort of meandered through what didn't make sense of what made sense, and have found my way towards more Eastern medicine approaches to health and well-being. So mental health challenges like depression you talked about, and anxiety, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, substance use disorder like the current epidemic that we're facing today with stimulants and methamphetamines. They have become pervasive and have really exacerbatedly so during the last 2 years of our response to COVID. And so there's been so much fear and shame and guilt and isolation that has further stigmatized the labels and the diagnoses that Western culture is so fast to slap onto people, and reducing them to symptoms and diagnoses. And these mental health conditions are blind to socioeconomic status, to race, to gender, sexual orientation. None of us, all of us are vulnerable, right? And so our people from every walk of life are susceptible. And this crisis parallels the incremental breakdown, like I mentioned, of the integrity of our cellular connections and the fibers of our relationships with ourselves and others and our natural environment. And so over the years, I've learned to weave Western and medical model and Eastern ways of health and well-being. And I will take us through a journey of Western medicine first, and then to Eastern medicine. And I would like to highlight SUD, which is substance use disorder, as well as ADHD, as well as by special request, look at the various approaches of Ayurveda during postpartum care during parenting. So a little bit about my story, just to kind of give us a sense of, various opportunity to look at another way of life and being than what we know in Western culture. And in a way that can actually help support and nurture our uniqueness through community. I was born and raised in Iran and moved to the United States when I was 11 with my sweet mom and brothers, and my dad joined us about a year later. And growing up in Iran, it was within a very intact ecosystem. And before GMOs and before biocides and herbicides, and in a communal village, like you mentioned, where people have their unique ways of expressing their gifts and supporting one another, with 150 aunts and cousins and uncles, many neighbors, everyone really interacting and nurturing. And I was also had the privilege of being immersed in nature and trees and swimming in the Caspian Sea. And so my dad always encouraged curiosity and play, in nature, something that I've actually carried carried forward with me to this day. I still really relish my playtime and downtime. It's something that I think has really helped me to be able to feel protected. You know, our lives were disrupted. There was a revolution in Iran in 1979, and there was a war of 7 years between Iraq and Iran, really mostly over resources and power and status and oil. Western powers were also involved, and as we can see, nothing has changed. Those are our values to this day. And we sought refuge in the United States, but unfortunately coming to New York, what we found instead was a concrete jungle that really cut me off from nature and my connection to all my community. And I just think that it's important to point out that at this macro level of war and atrocities, and between nations, and also the disconnect that we felt from nature and community in the United States parallels the micro level of how pharmaceuticals and biocides and herbicides like glyphosate, Zach, as you mentioned, which are notably mostly based on petroleum and chemicals, similarly break down the integrity of the cellular connections, causing dysbiosis, but ultimately disconnection from our cells in nature. So we end up not being able to commune with ourselves and nature, and then thus comes the breakdown. And that there's increased toxins in the air, there is in our food and our water systems, ultimately leading to separation from source. So there were some not really fun years in teenager years where we I kept imagining how could the American society really survive when they feel such disconnection from even themselves and from each other, where the neighbors kind of avoid each other, right? And so I became interested in mental health. And fast forward to when I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, I worked as a mental health counselor in a methadone clinic where I helped support people who are recovering from opiate use. And there was so much stigma around them and the attitude of them versus us and others. But I remember feeling distinctly that they really reminded me of me. They were just humans trying to make it in this crazy wild world. They reminded me of some of my family members who had suffered from heroin addiction in Iran. They were the ones that were most sensitive as well, is what I always noticed. They were always the kindest. And so it's like a world of expectations and potential stressors that don't really value humanness, I felt, and the full expression of the human experience, and that they don't support the cycles of life from preconception to transition. I was really aware of all of this. And so I really wanted to understand this connection that existed between the mind and the body, and to seek relief via substances. Why would someone choose to do that? So I went to graduate school, doctoral program in biopsychology with postgraduate work in behavioral medicine. And I learned to conduct clinical trials, and I learned about first line medication use to throw at any kind of disorders that they found. I learned about cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'll go over a little bit more later. CBT is really interesting. I'll go more into it because it is a Western approach to psychology. It is agnostic still, but it does have a lot of merits. It actually works for a lot of the various diagnoses incrementally, right? It does actually explore the many beliefs that people have, or feelings that are actually have come from childhood, right? From the traumas that they have felt and the belief systems that they continue to carry with them. And however, it does not explore that many belief systems and feelings are laced with messages of guilt and fear and shame that I really believe underlie much of the dis-ease that we experience, whether physical or mental. And I'll go more into the messages as well as the ways in which CBT has been applied to various mental health conditions. And so I want to a little bit about my experience in the biotech space, because after academia, I did transition into private practice and integrative medicine. And so with biotechnology. And right now I'm working with a really wonderful company called Therapeutics, where they create digital therapeutics and they pair downloadable apps that are called Reset and Reset O that provide cognitive behavioral therapy for substance use disorders like opiate, marijuana, cocaine, stimulants, and they have a lot of efficacy actually, and they improve access. They also have an app for insomnia. and which often overlaps with substance use disorders and depression. And they're actually, today we got news that they're moving into the realm of depression as well. So it's really wonderful, right? A lot of people don't have access to mental health for various reasons. One is there isn't enough mental health care providers in their area who are even trained in this particular modality, or any other ones that actually help focus on ADHD and substance use disorders. And so they may not have the money or the time to be able to go to a provider for long term. So these apps really improve, and they also actually prescribe, and they can be covered by insurance companies. So I highly recommend looking into therapeutics. This is not an advertisement. I really believe in their mission. And so now, going back to ADHD, the medical model of its treatment is really an example of how medications are not the panacea for all the mental health conditions and physical conditions. They're most often prescribed alone and at times in conjunction with CBT. Many of them are based on stimulants, which act the same way as cocaine and methamphetamines do. And they inadvertently destroy the cellular connections in our bodies and really affect our brain functioning. And in the long run, may even make ADHD symptoms worse, along with causing sleep conditions and mood and physical disorders. And this all works in a vicious cycle. Also, unfortunate is the tendency of these medications to be really addictive in nature, and thus giving rise to the substance use disorder epidemic that we see in our children and adults, especially with stimulants and methamphetamine use and Adderall prescription drugs. So when we are looking at treatment options, we really need to look at the whole individual with unique capacities to make sure that our treatments do not inadvertently snuff their natural capacities, right? Stimulants used in ADHD, for example, may abate symptoms short-term, but long-term, they downregulate the body's natural ability to really produce neurotransmitters that are really responsible for motivation and ability to be able to think outside of the box and overall creative expressions. And similar neuroimages have been found in cocaine and methamphetamine use as prescription drugs for ADHD, with decreased gray matter in the brain, which contains the neurons and the communication networks for the brain, as well as perfusion to certain parts of the brain that correlate with creative expressions, right? Here, I'm really highlighting what I would consider to be the biggest crisis, a crisis of faith in the wisdom and perfection of ourselves and of our universe. Using our Western lens and assessing someone in terms of symptoms that they're experiencing or the diagnosis that they have been given is really reductionistic in nature, right? It doesn't take into consideration our gifts and resources and the already healed parts of us that want to shine through if only allowed to be seen.
I love that. There's such a poignant, kind of interplay, it seems like, between the two aspects, where you started with the methadone clinic, treating chronic opiate addiction for chronic pain, and then you move to what seems like a more benign diagnosis, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Like, oh, the kid just has a hard time focusing. That's the story, narrative that is in there. But in both places, you're really touching on a sense of discomfort in the individual that we then try to cover up. And so we do it with drugs that inherently downregulate the very pathways that would lead to the discovery of the miracle within, right, that you're talking about there. And so in the case of opiates, we downregulate every opiate receptor on every single cell in the body as soon as you give them a dose of morphine or whatever it is. And as you move into higher and higher doses of Dilaudid and fentanyl and all these drugs of abuse that are entirely made by the pharmaceutical industry, OxyContin and the rest, these drugs have such a potent way of shutting down the entire network of pain control, such that pain becomes an inevitable result of being on these medications. And so I am just fundamentally amazed that as physicians and scientists, we know this and we keep doing it. It's been so hard for us to look outside the box. And yet, I think you just pointed out something amazing, which is cognitive behavior therapy for attention deficit is evidence-based, effective, and considered by the FDA and everything else first line of treatment. And so it's just like, how did we get ourselves glued into this narrow viewpoint of where health was going to come from? But I want to just think about it for a second, because you nailed that thing with the kids with attention deficit. And now we're putting on medications that take them out of their creative thought And now we have 1 in 6, 1 in 8 kids diagnosed with this condition, and we put them all on stimulants that take them into a fight or flight state at the biologic level, removing them from that parasympathetic awareness in their creative mind. And so what is, from your viewpoint, the pathway of healing that you have witnessed through Ayurvedic nutrition or CBT? What is the path back into that healing process?
Sure. Yeah, no, you're totally right. I just wanted to kind of point out that a lot of the ADHD children have been given the diagnosis of ADHD. They are certainly the creatives of the world, right? And so they'll tell you, my mind works differently. I can think outside the box. I can put these things together that normally other kids can't really put together. They come up with solutions that actually make sense, that seem like genius to a lot of adults, but really it's because of these neural networks that are working really very well for them. And it's just because of our societal values not valuing what they have to give, that we want to kind of subdue them and fit them into these boxes that are, allow them to become, servants and slaves later on in life. So certainly we have a lot of work to do with the education system. And so not going into details about ADHD and assuming everyone knows what they are, I do want to talk about how, besides CBT, which actually addresses the cognitions behind it, with Ayurveda, it is a very, very old system of thought, and it has been around for 3,000 years or so. It's a very comprehensive system, and it is alive and enlightening. And the actual definition of Ayurveda is a science of life that guides us to how to actually live. How do we wake up, go down with the sun, and come up with the moon, and what to eat, how to eat it, when to eat it, what combinations of food to eat, things that we sort of are supposed to be learning when we're children, right? Versus regurgitating data and not being able to think with our heart and what actually makes sense for us. And Ayurveda honors that every life form is seen as a unique combination of matter, spirit, and mind. And it approaches healing by balancing elemental forces that exist within all of us, and make up the physical and the spiritual parts of ourselves and our universe. And there is qualities of earth, of ether, of air, of water that I'll go more into. And Ayurveda is a really beautiful system where it actually thinks of the mind and the body as one and the same, mind, body, spirit, right? And so includes diseases of physical body, which are called Sharirika, and mental, which are called Manasika. And it's about the fact that mind is actually a place where consciousness can actually happen, right? The real self, or the Atman, or a Purusha, it's called. So the mind itself is not consciousness. The mind and the body are just the places for the consciousness to be able to be embodied. Um,
I
so
love this.
yeah.
So, give us an arc of, is there a moment in time where you see that healing journey of what that looks like applied? So once the Ayurvedic experience goes into play, what is that journey for one of those kids in your studies, or what was it, that showed you the path?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what's really interesting is that when we start talking about what we're actually taking into our body with Ayurveda, we're not just talking about what foods we're eating, which are really, really relevant, right, for children. What they choose to put into their body, whether it's sugared food or an organic matter that has, glyphosate or biocides in it, as well as preservatives, right? They're extremely sensitive to it and the way it actually affects them. So when we actually take them off of foods that are, causing these symptoms, we immediately see a brightening in their eyes and a calming sense, right? So Ayurveda gives prescriptions about that. And then it also talks about the various senses, what we're actually taking in with a sense of touch, like who we choose to allow to touch us, or how we actually touch ourselves, the products that we choose to put on our bodies, right? So kids learning about the inorganic products that they're using for their hair and their nails, the fabrics that we choose to put on our bodies in terms of our clothes, the sense of smell, what we're surrounding ourselves with, whether immersed in nature or not. And so all of this kind of being taken in, I think kids really take onto that to understand, like, and having an awareness as to why I'm actually being fidgety and not being able to pay attention, where there's all this stuff that we're actually exposing ourselves to, TV and internet as well, right? So they have all these beautiful prescriptions that they can give of herbal medicine, and that balances what they call the doshas, and so that they can reduce down the toxins in the body. And so with Ayurveda, it's actually effective for substance use disorder, for ADHD, for depression. They've showed incredible effects in all of them. There's a lot of beautiful body oil massages that they use for calming what they call vata, which is at the heart of ADHD and substance use disorders, and as well as our attachments. And they really kind of try to fire up with what's called the Agni, which is the fire in the belly. And they believe that, or Ayurveda believes that a fire in the belly helps determine clarity as well as passion in life.
I love it. So I think one of the things that is so profound about the journey from that pharmaceutical model to something like Ayurveda is you're literally talking about a system of practice and therapy that goes so far beyond the human to support that invisible microbiome and that huge community within, and you're triggering this huge cascade of events. Some 80% of the serotonin made in the human body is made in the gut lining, and the nutrition's interaction with the microbiome is actually what turns those enteric endocrine cells on to make the serotonin. More than 50% of the dopamine made in the body, made in that gut lining by the same enteric endocrine cells. And so the interplay that we learned over thousands of years, whether it be yogic traditions, Ayurveda, Qigong, Tai Chi, these are sciences that emerged out of human consciousness and the human experience over thousands of years. And we will be moving to Susan in a few minutes too, who will take a look at another technology that's been around for thousands of years and its impact on our understanding of who we are. And so I'm excited that when we start to look at the crises of mental health and everything else, we don't have to technologically figure out our way out of this path. We have to remember where we came from. And so it's a remembrance that's going to bring us into the solution, into the freedom, I think, more than that. Nafiseh, so thank you so much for the overview. We're going to come back to you in just a minute. TJ, we're going to turn to you. I want to pick up on that arc of a teenager, diagnosed with a condition and their journey out. And you have an amazing story yourself.
Thank you, Zach. So honored to be here, and merci Nafiseh. I just loved everything you shared. I also loved hearing the rooster in the background. It reminded me of my time in Kauai. So beautiful there. And yes, I actually, anytime I start talking about my career, I always want to start with the personal, because my personal journey not only informed how I've come to this point of view, but I think it is this shared agreement. It's this shared experience. And what I want to say to start is, I think we are in a pandemic, and that pandemic is a pandemic of separation. And Zach, you spoke to it so beautifully that therefore, the remedy to that is remembering a greater reality, remembering a deeper truth of who and what we are. And that is the journey that we're on. I'm also thinking of Tesla, who said, the moment we start to study non-physical reality, we will make more progress in a decade than we did in the previous hundreds of years. And so I always acknowledge that there's a physical and intellectual, emotional, and a spiritual reality. And we are in remarkable time, a remarkable turning point in human history where all of this is coming together. And to me, the commonality is really two things. One is connection, and two is curiosity. And to me, that's the exciting part, because, I'm the spiritual guy, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I kind of came into the mental health field through the back door a little bit of spirituality. And we're coming to a really similar conclusion. And that is we have separated from our true nature, and we have separated from the authentic human experience of being connected with one another and connected with ourselves. So I start by sharing my own story because it speaks to exactly what that journey looked like for me. And then I have the honor and the privilege of sharing how I have been able to return to my true nature and what that path looked like. I was reflecting this morning in preparing for this, and I was reminded that I had these 3 turning points early in life at age 7, 14, and 21, and realizing that they were in this 7-year cycle. And there's something interesting to me about that. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I do think there's something there. And so when I was 7, this first major turning point was the turning point of closing my heart and shutting down. And Zach, as you were speaking in the beginning, you were talking about a frequency. And I remember coming into the world with the frequency of joy. I remember it just so distinctly, being so aware, so open, so pure, so present, connected with myself and the world. And this event that happened at 7, and it wasn't an external event, it was an internal, what we might have once called a coping mechanism. And I actually call a brilliant strategy, which I'm going to talk more about in a few minutes. That strategy was not conscious, and that strategy saved my life. And I built a wall around my heart. And I remember a physical sensation. It was as if there was something covering up the experience, and feeling that, I think, was the moment that I made the fundamental decision that I was not lovable and that I was broken. And when I think about a 7-year-old, and I have a nephew now, he just turned 18, but I was very active in his life at around his age 7. And I remember looking at him and imagining my little precious 7-year-old making that huge decision that I was broken or damaged. And so that in itself was a brilliant strategy, because it did protect me from what was happening in my environment. And it also protected me from the love and connection that I truly desired, and that what I've come to understand is the fundamental need of all human beings. And so if we look at this through a mental health lens or a psychology lens, we would say that is where the attachment wound originated. You know, I came into a family system where what people were saying, what people were doing, and the energy I felt were 3 totally different things. So I closed off. It was brilliant, and yet it created these wounds. And I walked around feeling broken and damaged until I was 14, when I discovered drugs and alcohol, and that was that next pivot point. Drugs and alcohol, at least temporarily, brought me back to the experience of presence and openness and love and awe and wonder that for the last 7 years, the previous 7 years, I hadn't been able to access. And so it was relief. It was once again a brilliant strategy. And I then actively participated in an addiction in all sorts of absurd ways. And yet at the root of it was I was trying to get loved. I imagine it like I'm holding my umbilical cord in my hand, trying to plug into someone or something to feel whole again. And that outer search lasted for those 7 years and included just about everything you can imagine that one would become addicted to, whether it's shopping or looking good or sex or shopping. It's all of it. Eating, the clothes I wore. And at age, just before I turned 21, I got sober. And so I do feel very honored to be sober for 35 years now. And that began a journey toward rediscovering my true nature. But I do want to share something that I think was a poignant moment. And that was around maybe 18 months to 2 years sober, I found myself suicidal. And the reason this is important to bring into the conversation is it is the foundation of what has become my life's work, which is conscious recovery. And that is, I was in a paradigm at the time that I felt broken, I felt damaged. I had so much shame and so much guilt about my life. And I was in a support group, a circle of people that maybe unconsciously were confirming that, yeah, there's something fundamentally wrong with you. Zach, when you talked about, like, I would never say I am cancer, but we say I am an alcoholic, or I am an addict, or I am depressed. And those words hold so much power, but more than just the power of the words is going back to the frequency. I had this frequency of brokenness, of unlovability. I hadn't addressed the underlying root causes. And what people were saying to me is, don't worry about any of that. Just don't drink today. Your life is a miracle. Go help someone else. And although I understand the spirit of that, I also had the experience of what happened when I didn't address the underlying root causes. I met a woman who changed my life. She was a student of Eastern thought. She brought me into a journey of remembering what I now call the great remembering of the truth of who and what I am. So I started working in the addiction treatment field in 2008. And like I said, I came kind of through the back door. My education, my degrees are in spiritual leadership, spiritual counseling. And I started working in the field, and I came in with a commitment. And that commitment was I was going to be curious about what would get created if I were to look at every single person I encounter through the lens of wholeness and potentiality instead of brokenness. And I also quickly realized, and of course I knew this, but it was very visceral in the field, that we were treating symptoms and behaviors, and we were diagnosing people. And the intention was, what are your symptoms and how do I help you get rid of them? And I noticed that clinicians, therapists, counselors, very well-intentioned, were trained to diagnose and treat. And that was useful and limited because we weren't really getting down to the root causes. And so this curiosity that I came in with really is what will get created, or what does get created, when I look for the potential in the other person. And I don't see myself as the fixer because I recognize that they're not broken.
Mhm.
And
I've experienced that. I think it, for all you listening right now, it's like, what would that look like? What would that feel like if we all approached each other with a sense of awareness of the wholeness and a curiosity to glimpse that? And I just met TJ a few weeks ago in one of these wonderful moments of synchronicity that we tend to call coincidence, but are clearly carefully designed soul journeys. And he texted me. I didn't know who he was or what was going on, and published something. And he's like, texted me. I was busy with my weekend, and I was like, okay, yeah, sure, we'll meet some point in the future, blah blah blah. And I'm on the East Coast, and he says, oh, I'm in LA. And I'm like, oh, I'm in LA right now. He's like, well, I'm just having a meal in West Hollywood. Turns out he's like 4 minutes from me at that moment. And so I was like, all right, that's like, feels like universe, like saying like, Zach, you can take the 4 minutes and get your ass over there, meet this dude TJ and see what he's up to. There's something knocking. And I showed up there and dropped in, and it was outdoor seating, eating area, and you were with your husband talking, and sat down there with the two of you. And I felt whole. I felt seen. I felt included in your life. And I had just met you seconds ago. And so what I can tell you after decades of you practicing that is it works, and it feels good to step into somebody's life that is curious about who I am. And so often when we meet each other, people are, a bunch of people running around writing books and traveling and speaking on stages and thrust up on that pedestal, there tends to be a little bit of a period of warm up, and there was just no warm up. I just dropped in, sat down, and you were right so present and respectful on one level, but it was the curiosity that you just spoke of that I couldn't put a finger on. Of like, why did it feel like that to sit down in front of TJ? And it felt like you were curious about who I was. And I just want to honor that and give a little bit of light to the audience of this is how it will feel when we begin to see each other as something more than a series of symptoms or diagnoses or broken, split minds of the ego and all of this. So TJ, well done, well played. You're going in an awesome path. I interrupted you completely, but I just wanted to give a little bit of color to the application and what the human experience is on the other side of these long journeys of finding truth.
Wow. And I'm so inspired by what you just shared, because that was my experience of you, in the same way that I didn't know you really. I knew about your work, and the moment that we met, there was an immediate resonance. And, that really what you're speaking to, Zach, was the experience that I felt when I met Mary Helen, who was the woman who changed my life, really, because she witnessed something within me that I didn't have the ability to access, or I didn't know I had the ability to access. And by her presence, not her teaching, not her words or not her thoughts, her presence shifted me instantly. And so the work that I've created, Conscious Recovery, we look at two aspects that are really important. One is the curiosity of what the root causes of addiction are and how we can start to heal them. I have a big mission, I have a big vision, and that is that we no longer call ourselves addiction treatment centers, but we shift into healing centers. And beyond that, at one point, I'd love this to be really referring to ourselves as wholeness centers or wellness centers, but there's a bridge there. And my experience is the root causes of addiction are unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame. And I'll speak for a few more minutes because I want to talk about a couple of important key points. And I know I'm so looking forward to hearing Susan and being in conversation with all of you. The question of the root causes is the beginning, and becoming curious about how we can start to heal them. And Zach, what you spoke to is so profound, because I have the honor of going into treatment programs throughout the United States and training clinicians. And I will often hear a few things. One, I'll hear, we just don't have enough time. Insurance isn't giving us enough days. I have too many patients. And we're in this system of treating the symptoms and sending them on their way and giving them this toolkit. And then they're coming back 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. And something profound can happen in 3 minutes of presence where someone can experience themselves. And so as we start to look at how we can heal the disconnection and the shame and the unresolved trauma, the very act of being present and beholding someone in their infinite potential is profound, and it can happen in an instant. And then we can look at how we can begin to shift that presence to ourselves and to our past, and being able to reparent, look at how we did come into the world as a whole imperfect spiritual being, and then we were programmed to believe we were limited or broken in some way. Most of that was not conscious. And then how we can reparent ourselves, reconnect with our true nature, start to have love and compassion for ourselves so that we can begin to unlearn some of the strategies that we've developed. And looking at addiction not as a coping mechanism, but a brilliant strategy, and start to dialogue with that, and then become present with the part of ourselves that feels wounded. And a big part of it, and this is what I'll close with at this point, is a big part of it is allowing ourselves to have the emotional experience that we weren't allowed to have at the time. I think on Tuesday, when we were all together, we talked about the power of being seen. And part of the power of being seen is being honored for the emotional experience. And go to your room so you can stop crying, boys don't cry, I'll give you something to cry about, all those messages. And then we go into like either therapy or we go into a spiritual practice. And the goal of it is actually to become like we were innately and inherently as a 3-year-old who expresses their emotion and then goes back to their natural sense of joy. And so we program them to believe that that's not what it means to be human. And actually what it means to be human and what it means to be spiritual is one and the same. So I could talk for another hour, but I'm just so incredibly grateful to be here with all of you.
That's so beautiful. And you're speaking there to this kind of deep wound within us, and this, kind of commonality in addiction. And I love that, we can expand it beyond substances to realize that addictive behavior can express itself in so many ways. That consumerism, that if we picked any single trait of humans that's killing the planet the fastest, I would say consumerism is the addiction that we are universally expressing as a species. We are consuming the very essence of life out of Earth by everything we do. We extract, we give nothing back. And so that consumer addiction that we have can take so many forms. But I want us to broadly think about that as the audience. Nafiseh, you spoke so clearly to this us and them mentality that we have as practitioners to the patient, or people who see, those are people that have alcoholism, or those are people. We are all addicted because we all have the same original wound. And that original wound is one of detachment. And that original wound is one of a sense of, that abandonment from the greater organism. And we don't understand it when it happens. We can feel it though. And so as children, when we feel the separation from that original, soul journey into joy, the resonance and frequencies of joy, love, happiness, abundance that we innately know, and then the things that begin to separate us from those experiences, the beliefs that have to be layered in there to give you a sense of scarcity, inadequacy, abandonment, these deep beliefs, we start to see that shell. And so this takes us to Susan Olesek. You have had an incredible last decade of journey, and I want you to paint where we go from this sense of, abandonment and loneliness and the separation event into the arc of life through your work. Susan is the head of the Enneagram Prison Project and has had an incredible journey in looking at the ways in which this ancient tool, so similar to Ayurveda in its journey here, can light a path to a deeper understanding of who we are and take us out of the suffering that we tend to create for ourselves. So Susan, thank you for being with us. A deep gratitude to you for the vision and the willingness that you've had to do the work that you've had. You have been a pioneer in this space, and I just honor that journey and the other women that have been drawn to your project. And I'm sure there's men in the group too, but thinking of Tara and all the other amazing people that have worked alongside of you. Incredible to see the impact and the deep wisdom that's come out of this project. It's just inspiring. So thank you for being with us. Give us a little bit of perspective maybe of what the Enneagram is and how you came upon it and what the arc of the journey has been.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you for including me in this amazing group. I just feel like everyone else, I sit at your feet, and it's been really beautiful to sit with these other beautiful hearts and minds. And we're all pretty much saying the same thing in our own, different perspectives. So I get really excited when I think about what you're envisioning for yourself and taking yourself off the pedestal that you didn't put yourself on, and then moving into community. I feel like this is how it's my favorite way to learn. And I don't know how many of our listeners understand or know the Enneagram, but we have references from places for you to go learn more about it. I think that it's the first place I'd like to begin because it's actually a map of what's right about us. And it's also a map of how we forget that. And I can talk to that a little bit. I always love to follow TJ because you do make things so personal, TJ, in your work. And I resonate so much with what you're speaking to in this pandemic of separation, and how many of us understand more profoundly over the last 18 months, almost 2 years, than we ever did about what it is to be on lockdown. And my work has been about 150 feet in the prisons, which is really my favorite place to learn. And I went into prison to teach something, and I was just a classic example of teach what I needed to learn. I didn't really know how separated I was from myself, even though I was honestly already a certified Enneagram teacher. So I just know that all of us come from trauma, and everyone over the last, almost 2 years has suffered one adverse childhood experience. If you're under 18, which is surviving this pandemic. And I learned about the Enneagram when I was a brand new mom, and I work with type 1 on the Enneagram, which is a type that we often call the idealist, and is a type that often sees that things could be better. And so I found my way into a parenting class, and in this parenting class, my instructor used a very old method called the Gordon method, and it was parent effectiveness training, which some of you in the 70s will remember. So it was new to me, but the founder of that, Thomas Gordon, was a colleague of Carl Rogers, who is one of my absolute favorite psychologists, and he coined this term unconditional positive regard, and was working with other clinical psychiatrists to help them to understand the skills that therapists were using to help their clients overcome maladaptive behaviors. And so instead of teaching these archaic, I think very harmful parenting tactics of fear and punishment, and Alfie Kohn has a book called Punished by Rewards, like all of this kind of overriding children, that kind of method. What do you know? Children don't respond well to that. And so when I started to hear this revolutionary approach, and I didn't have teenagers yet, but I was afraid that they were coming. The method and my instructor explained to me that it's not that kids are rebellious. And, if you've ever seen a baby, you can know that children are inherently good. Like we all come amazing with all these, what the Enneagram refers to, these essential qualities fully intact, as everyone's been saying. And we never lose those qualities, but we do go away from them. And why? And what I started to understand is that the reason that we go away from those qualities is because we don't perceive ourselves to be safe. We don't perceive ourselves to be seen. We actually know we're not being seen. Children are so wise and connected to source, and they are right there. And for better or for worse, they meet our parents, right? And then there's the rest of us. And so it's not that the kids are, there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with any of us. And that's what I started to put together as this beautiful parenting instructor was putting together this method with the Enneagram, that the Enneagram points to these 9 different ways, distinct ways in which we come with a superpower, with like a gift like no other has. And I am not going to teach the Enneagram, although I could be here for days, but if I'm screen sharing, can you see that, Zach? Yeah. Okay. So this is just the way Enneagram Prison Project has works with the Enneagram. And for anyone who's never seen it, I don't want you to get it, too confused or overwhelmed by it. The first thing I want you to notice is that it's in a circle. And so the Enneagram is based in, antiquity and all the ancient laws, and one of them being the law of one. And that's what you opened with, Zach, that there's a resonance in all of us because we're connected. And that's law. That's true. And then the second part of the Enneagram is that triangle in the middle, which is based on the law of 3. And that means as soon as we get into that, we're like humanity, right? The human condition. No, I'm this, I'm not that. And now we're in the duality. But actually, the invitation from this law of 3 is to recognize that if there's something holding these two oppositional, forces, and that if we can hold these two seemingly incongruent, disparate things, then something else can emerge. And then we have this crazy hexad in the middle, which is about the law of change. And we can go more into that. But when you look at the Enneagram, it points to these essentially right qualities that are in all of us. And 8s come to teach the rest of us about aliveness and immediacy and the strength that is inherent in us. And 8s can, if you meet an 8 who's really present, they're not overriding anyone. They're just holding the bigness of all that's here to come through us. And that being so connected to everyone and everything, that's in 8 too. That's enlivening. And I believe, I don't know what type you are, TJ, and we could go there if you want, but when you talk about how you came and knowing that you were a little being full of joy, well, 7s come to teach the rest of us about joy. And you can't, are you a 7? Is that so just like, and that's just how you be. And that's how you've always been. But so you didn't choose the childhood that was chosen for you. I feel like I do say we're all in a prison of our own making and how we suffer our personalities, but I feel like our first prison was the one made for us in childhood, and nobody would pick trauma, right? So 6s come to teach the rest of us about awakeness. And I'm just outing everyone here on our panel. Nafisseh shared that she relates to type 6, and 6s are awake. They help other people wake up and say, what the hell? How come we're not talking about what's real, what's true? And you can feel that coming through Nafisseh. And 5s come to teach the rest of us about clarity, about knowing. There's a deep wisdom that wants to come through us that is not about thinking. It's about understanding, transmitting something. It's about a clarity in the way that we see. And 4s come to teach the rest of us about depth and authenticity, about what's real and about what's real when we're intimate with each other. And there's something so rich and valuable about that. 3s come to teach the rest of us about preciousness, about radiance, and there's a real hope in that. And I haven't talked with you about the Enneagram too recently, Zach. We kicked around 3 for a while, right? And I heard you talking on a podcast recently about how you perceive yourself to be a fixer. And you said something, I was like, I just get you so much. You said, if I'm a fixer, I could, and you did it in such a entertaining way. I could fix this, I could fix that, I could fix that. And then you said, well, if I'm a fixer, you say it. What do I have to be around, right?
I got to be around problems.
Right.
I got to have so much brokenness, and that so resonates. I love you stepping through this. I've never seen it reduced, so I want you to finish 2 and 1, but I'll come back to that 3 for a second.
Yeah, so thank you. See, just including, right, Zach's sensibility. Well, there's a preciousness about type 3s. They come to teach the rest of us about our value and about our worth. And I don't have to be fixing things that are around me, but I might unconsciously be putting them in my path, because if that's my identity, I need those things in order to be. And when threes really get the inherent value of who they are, they don't want to be up on a pedestal. They're your light, three's light just shines out. You don't need to go take the spotlight and turn it on me. I just be. And then this wisdom comes out of us. Twos come to teach the rest of us about love. It's just period. It's impossible not to be about love if you are type 2. That's where twos, that's where they source, and they sense other people, and there is a sweetness that comes through how they nurture, and the relatedness and the way that they caretake other people. That is in their sensibility, it's in their wiring, it's in our biology. You can't change that, and don't want to. And I didn't mean to go backwards, but here I are. Type 1 is the type that I work with, and ones come to teach the rest of us about goodness and about what's pure. We want to keep things pure, and it is upsetting to us when it's upsetting to me when we don't start with this on the Enneagram. When people use the Enneagram to talk about, oh yeah, you're that's not the point of the tool. That's what happens when we disconnect. When we disconnect, we start to imitate these qualities instead. And it's so funny to end up this way. So 9s come to teach the rest of us about wholeness. They're right there on the top. There's we call type 9 sometimes the crown of the Enneagram, because they sense and understand how much more whole we are when everyone belongs. And there's the sense of unity in that. And so I'm going to stop for a second, and then I'm going to go back to what occurred to you, Zach, when I did hit on type 3 and what you're thinking about with the Enneagram.
Well, it's just so spectacular. I mean, I want everybody listening to understand that you fall 1 through 9. You will relate and express yourself in one of these contexts. And I want to just take a moment to just freaking celebrate every one of those, right? Like, who doesn't want to be something in that list? And so Richard Rohr was the first book that I read on the Enneagram, and he had a very kind of, I think, Western mindset around it. And he used the terms redeemed and unredeemed qualities or aspects of each of those 9. And he just shows the beautiful nature of each, and how when broken and when separated from your sense of that self, how you act in a very predictable fashion. And so the 8, who is separated from its nature, is going to express itself much differently with human ego than the 3 will. My 3 in its state, we can look to other, famous people who've had that trait, and you get JFK and Hitler. And so it's like, that's the same expression of either connected or disconnected. And so who engineered the greatest, Holocaust in history was likely the most lonely, isolated, prisoned mind that we've ever witnessed. And so I love your description there, that I think really supersedes Richard Rohr's, use of the redeemed and unredeemed. I think it's the imprisoned mind and the free mind, and the imprisoned self and the free self. And I've gotten some really nice pushback recently from the community when I express that we can't heal in isolation. We have to be connected to a community. And there was some really smart pushback that said, but my healing began when I went into silence and found self and found that. And so I wasn't in community when I started my healing journey. And I want to make the distinction here, because I think it's important. Being alone is much different than being isolated, because there's actually more to you than meets the eye, right? And I'm amazed to think that it's only when I primarily exist, or maybe solely exist, in my human mind that I am in prison. But the Enneagram is this pathway back to this connection where I'm no longer alone, because there is a soul that is ancient, that is now expressing itself through me, and I can connect to this extrasensory experience of having a resonant energy center within me that is not in my brain. If you've ever found it, it's deep in your core. It's like down in your pelvis, and you feel this vibrational sense of self, this vibrational energy of this multidimensional being that is you. And so you cannot be alone when you are aware of your soul, when you're aware of the greater self, when the Enneagram shows you through that mirror just how beautiful and complex you are. And I tie that then back to that imprisoned mind. And I have been there so many times as that Mr. Fix-It and the number 3 there, is I had to create so many broken things to keep giving myself a sense of import or a sense of identity, a sense of validity, because I was measuring my value wrong. And now in my redeemed, movement towards a redeemed state or a free state of a 3, I'm here apparently, as Susan just so wise to say, we are precious and we are so valuable. We're just using the wrong freaking metrics on the kids that we would say that's a kid with ADHD.
And it's okay. It's okay to use our personality. Like TJ said, like it's useful, but it's limited. And so let us just like see, we're about transcending and including, to use Fred Laloux's work. We want to just keep all of it, but understand that our entry point to the diagram is what it is. And we all came that way, right? That's what gives us, I think, gives me compassion for my parents, who I wasn't parented perfectly. I wasn't. And none of us are exactly. And that's the thing that I think is the entry point to compassion, right? So being able to use the Enneagram as a way to understand that there are things that happened to me that shouldn't have happened. And there are things that should have happened that didn't. And those are Winnicott's words. I feel like I don't have any original anything. I'm standing on the shoulders of Richard Rohr. I listened to him for years to try to understand this. And I am not an academic. I don't fancy myself to be that. But I am someone who understands hurting. And when I saw what was happening with this tool in prisons, I about fell off my chair and wanted to know, like, well, how can I be a translator of this and make access to this tool to everyone on the planet so that we can become more whole? Is it okay if I share one more slide, Zach, about how we get to this human condition, or do you want to go somewhere else?
I want you to share whatever you feel inspired to do. So yes, that, but just to plant a seed, and you can gauge the time if you want. But I want you to bring us to that, back to the imprisoned mind at some point, and contrast prisons with high schools and your experience in those two environments with the same tool.
I can do that. And I think the best way to do that, honestly, is to share, how do we get one of these personalities in the first place? We're alluding to it, but I think it's very simple to look at it with this diagram. We all start with this divine spark. We've been talking about it. Sometimes you're standing in the grocery store and there's a little baby in the carriage thing in front of you. And that baby just is like unblinking. They are so present. They're there. And I find myself like almost looking away, right? We get uncomfortable, but children come like this. And then we also come, people say, is it nature? Is it nurture? Well, it's both. They come with a temperament. And I have 3 children. Temperament, I didn't make that thing, right? They come the way they come. And so some of the temperament is, very, I'm here, deal with me. It's like this energy, this inborn animal nature about the way in which our divine spark wants to come through us. And there are other temperaments that are naturally, intrinsically, biologically, the way we're organized, just more withdrawn. And that's just how we are. So it's a little bit unchangeable, but of course we're in the transformation business. So it can change, we can adapt, but we have a way that we're wired. And then we meet our parents, right? And then the way that our parents come in, think about that. If I am a very withdrawn energy and I really need to, I'm like high sensory, right? I need to take the world in. And then my very assertive parent comes in and it's like, come on, we're going to go play and we're going to go do this, even if it's well-intentioned. That's a dynamic, right? And now the little child, what we really all want is just to be seen for who we are. What the Enneagram helps us helped me to do when I was a new parent. I already knew I had a type 8. One of the most assertive types on the Enneagram. I already knew I wasn't that type. And I was going like this with my son, like trying to make him fit into some way of order. And he wasn't going to have any of it. He wanted to be met. He wanted to be loved. He said, hug me hard. I want to feel you. And he said, but I will hug you soft, right? So we come into this dynamic, and this attachment relationship is everything. How we see each other and how we are seen is the thing that lets us know it's okay to be me. This makes me cry. Like, how many of us felt like it was okay to be who we were when we were born? Like, it's a faint memory of TJ's, but it took something that happened that took us away from that. So the conditioning experience, the more trauma we have, the more personality we need in order to keep those barriers up so that we can feel okay inside of ourselves. And so the way we come out of childhood is about how present we're able to be in any given moment. And when I started to realize this, I was realizing that all human behavior is an attempt just to get that need met. And so when my son, my beautiful type 8, like I am like so positively biased for type 8s right now, when he comes in with all his heart. I needed to get on my knees and meet him in the eye and tell him what was what. And it took energy from me. It wasn't my normal way of being, but it wasn't up to my son to change, right? So when parents have this dynamic, unknowingly, we just don't see our kids. And our kids develop these stories about who we are and who we aren't, and who it's safe to be and who it isn't. And then if we have trauma that's layered on top of that, hurting people are the ones that are hurting people. So we use in our work with the Enneagram Prison Project, we teach this is a slide from my class, what we teach inside jails and prisons. And the students in our class are sitting on the edge of their seats because they're saying, what's the matter with me? How did I get here? And we say to them, nothing is wrong with you. You are beautiful. You are whole. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you. And there are things that happen to you, and you have strategies, TJ's words again, that you used intelligently in order to be okay with whatever happened to you. And for those who don't know that adverse childhood experience study, you get 1 point for every kind of adverse experience that happened to you in childhood: social, sexual, emotional abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, a parent being divorced, losing a parent to incarceration. Each one of those gives you a point. And our students often most of them are 6 or higher, often 10. And so if I had all that stuff happen to me, mostly I've never been seen for who we are. And so what we do is that, our special secret ingredient is love. And we teach this in jails and prisons, have for a decade, but we piloted in a high school, to go to your question, Zach. And we wanted to see, what about this is different than for working in high schools? And it turns out nothing. All of the students in my pretty, schmancy high school, public high school that my kids go to, addiction, adverse childhood experience, all those things are going on with our kids. And I'll tell you the hardest people to teach are the children in the high school, because they don't self-select in, right? They're slumped in their chairs, their arms are crossed, their hoods are up. Some of them are, but we need to self-select into this work, and we need to kind of be in the dysfunction of our personality before we begin to deconstruct it. So I'll say that much.
I think it also speaks amazingly to the phenomenon of stress, and it's the energy of stress. I see it over and over again in my patients with stage 4 cancer diagnosis that comes out of the blue, and they suddenly go from they're cruising through life, they think they got it all together, to they suddenly think they're dying. And so the delta between Monday and Wednesday for that human being is so dramatic, and it creates a potential energy. And so as bad as it seems, or traumatic as it seems, it literally creates a potential energy that I've learned to work with in clinic, that on the first day, I never mention cancer because it's irrelevant to the story. It's just a symptom downstream 20 years after, 40 years after the whole thing started. It's about attachment disorder. It's about a cell being detached from the greater system and losing its remembrance that it functions within a village. And we need to kind of back out of that system. And so I want to recognize that in our wealth, and in our parenting technique, where we try to blanket our kids with protection, we take away that delta potential, because we're trying to shield them from the little stressors of life that would give them the ability to start to discern their own capacity for transformation. And so I think it's interesting to have the possibility that our children at 15, 16, 17 years old in high school are in a more intense prison of their mind than the individual who has had a broken home and had divorce and had all of these things happen to them, and they've been in prison, and they've been in and out of prison a couple times, and they went through juvenile retention courts, and the whole thing happened. There were so many moments of potential energy in there. And so when you give them the Enneagram, you do see those massive transformative events in front of your face, and everybody falls off their chair watching somebody that's convicted for murder at age 17 transform into this beautiful being in front of you when they just see themselves for a moment, because the potential energy that is stored up in their body from the stressors that they have occurred. And so I wonder, in a lot of ways, if the greatest parenting is not a state of protectivism, but actually a state, maybe TJ, reflect on this for us, but a state of curiosity. Like you said there, as well, like, who is that number 8 kid? And who is that? We have such a tendency to think that everybody else sees the world like we do.
Yeah, and I love, thank you, Susan and Zach. I love everything that's been shared, and part of it is looking at this idea of what's right about you, right? And that's the question. The strategy that was developed was a strategy for safety. And as a parent, what's the number one thing I can offer, whether we're talking about our partner, our child, our loved ones, someone we work with? It's presence, it's openness, and it's curiosity, and it goes a little deeper. And we've talked about this, we've talked about it already multiple times, but to behold the wholeness in a person is really different even than being curious about them, right? It's interwoven. And I work with a lot of times I'll work with parents, right, who have, let's look at the archetype of, the 22-year-old heroin addict who's been in treatment 7 times, and mom doesn't know what to do. And maybe she's been taught that tough love is the way. And sort of the old paradigm of recovery, which is, I love you, but if you don't do what I want, I'm going to withhold the love from you. And I understand it. I do, because it's exhausting, right? And people, their hearts are broken and their hearts are breaking. And with a very, very subtle, but massively profound shift, when we start to ask the question, can I be curious about the part of them that came into this world as a whole and perfect little baby? And I haven't been a parent, and I imagine being a mother or a father and remembering, I'm looking at my 20-year-old who's, suffering, maybe in and out of jail and all the things that come with addiction, and to remember their preciousness, to remember that, and then to hold that space, because, quantum mechanics is now beginning to recognize and measure how powerful the observer is. And so if I'm looking at my child as broken or inherently flawed, the possibility of that emerging becomes greater. And Zach, I love what you talked about with the 3, right? When I thought I was the fixer, I needed to have problems. And sometimes that's the family system. When we look at addiction, it's often the person with the mental health diagnosis or the addiction that's what we call the identified patient. They're what's wrong, right? And then when we open up to curiosity and say, I wonder what might happen if we started to look for our own wholeness. And sometimes when people hear it, Zach, it reminds me when you were talking about isolation and being alone, they're very different. When we're talking about this idea of looking at the wholeness, we're not saying we don't need to be accountable for our behavior, but we're so much more than the behavior. And the behavior is an indicator of something. And I think what we're all coming to is it's a separation from true nature. It's a separation from each other. And so as we start to hold that and start to become curious, because I love it. The personality is not right or wrong. The personality is a strategy that we've developed to feel safe. Susan, you said that, and that's just beautiful and so in alignment. So when we become curious about that strategy and curious about what preceded it and curious about how we can support each other in remembering our true nature, that's when we start to see what we call the quantum shift. It happens instantly. What if it didn't need to be a process? What if it could happen instantly just by becoming curious about that possibility?
Love it. Nafiseh, you touched on something in your intro there that I want to cycle back to, because both Susan and TJ today and a couple days ago, as we were talking through this, used the term that I hadn't really heard before and hadn't considered, which is we need to create space in our lives to reparent ourselves. And so with that new awareness that our parents lacked because they hadn't been given the social tools or the intellectual tools to understand who we are, don't each of us now wonder, man, I wish I had known which number on the Enneagram my kid was when they came into the world, so I would have met them where they were at instead of try to make them fit into the form of the parent. I'm so amazed by that journey for you and getting a glimpse of that, Susan. But as you hear this, Nafiseh, you were talking a lot about that postpartum support and that kind of rebirthing process. And so when we think about reparenting ourselves, how does that fit into your experience?
I love that, reparenting. Yes, absolutely. So I think that when we think about Ayurveda, it does imagine the person already healed and already whole And it believes that the body has all the wisdom to be able to do two major processes, which are to nurture itself and to detox itself. So all the rasayanas, or the various practices in Ayurveda, whether it is about food or about herbs or about massages or certain physical poses of meditation, they're there to support our natural ability to be able to heal. And so it honors the full person. And usually it's within a community, right? In the traditional cultures, most often you were co-living with a bunch of relatives or extended family, or various women would come together. So this Ayurveda and postpartum time, it honors all. I want to be able to honor all the mothers and fathers who are actually going through that period of time and birthing the new humanity, right? And so Ayurveda sees the family as, in the postpartum time, as a very sacred time. A new child is a blessing for the family and the world, and this entering parenthood is a transition like no other, right? I'm not a parent, but I've seen many parents go through this, where you become a full-time caretaker and nurturer, and really being a full service, negating all of self needs, right? And so I've heard parents talk about how it takes them a long time to be able to return to where they feel whole again, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And so Ayurveda really honors the first 42 days after giving birth as a sacred time of huge transition. So really kind of stopping and thinking and being. This is the time for nurturance, for settling down, so that we have more energy to be able to give to the baby and welcome it and to bond with it, right? And so I have a really dear friend, Kelsey Leah, who is an Ayurvedic postpartum practitioner on Kauai, and who's gleaned a lot of wisdom from. And she's always talking about how Ayurveda reminds women of their divinity and their innate wisdom, and recognizes that this precious postnatal time is a sacred window, a powerful opportunity for transformation, right? So we always think about postpartum care as, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to sleep. I'm going to be drained. My body is overweight, blah, 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 right? And I can't work, overworked. And so really, if we can actually stop and support the mother and the father, it could be a beautiful time of going within and delving in and re-nurture self, so that you can actually provide that for the baby and the wave of the future. So it balances the elements of nature. It gives parents support. In the old times, there were a lot of women coming together when the mother would be giving birth. They would come together and they would take care of A through Z of what she needed, from food to support to massage. And of course, in Western culture, we don't necessarily have that, unfortunately, but at least the first 2 weeks, the mother needs to just be able to be, right? And of course, the father needs help too. So however we can actually help our family members during this time is really, really important. So Ayurveda thinks of the mother as having to need to calm vata after she gives birth. Vata, as mentioned, is earth and ether. Ether and air elements, and childbirth can be very vata provoking. And so allowing for nourishing recovery period is really important. And during this time, mom has a lot of mobile, light and dry and cold qualities. She's exuded so much energy and blood and fluids that have left her body, and a huge space in her abdomen where the baby used to be, right? So that's all very much vata. And then there is a period of many middle of the night awakenings and feedings. And so that further exacerbates vata and fatigue. And so we need to calm vata really quickly, right, for a mother. And we want to provide her with very nourishing, heavy, warm, oily, smooth, and very stable qualities. That's with food, but as well as with touch and oils, and massage and herbs as well. So they're called rejuvenating treatments. And the first 42 days is when they're focused upon. And so that this helps the mother to be able to use her energy to bond with her new baby and with her partner as well. And so there's dinacharya. The mother used to have a daily life, and she will wake up in the morning, have her coffee, but that's not happening, right? And so what do we do? How do we support the mom to be able to establish into this new way of being? And so they're given a lot of support, and there's simple steps to calm vata. A lot of what's called Brahmi oil. It's oil of the gods are used on the top of the head each morning, which encourages sleeping with an eye pillow and a light scarf around the head and the ears, and using what's called apana and prana, upward and downward moving pranas, hold those various finger positions. And then we want to be taking special care of the sense organs and avoiding extreme sounds, weather, wind, extreme smells, or significant demands on the body and the mind. And also just kind of limiting going out into public places or having a lot of visitors for the first 42 days. Food is extremely important. You want to keep it very simple. You don't want to be giving birth and going out and having pizza and hamburgers right away. That puts a lot of pressure on the body, because especially after giving birth, the agni, or the digestive fire, is actually is considered not as strong as it has been in the past. And so we want to help slowly support the body back into this passionate heat of the agni, right? So we want to give it very digestible cooked foods that are balanced, a lot more sweeter tastes that are balanced with sweet vegetables like zucchini and beets and carrots and all of that. We want the food to be 60 to 70% made of grains, as well as sweet vegetables. And then we want to be building ojas and vitality building foods, sipping warm water. And then there's herbal teas that are given, and what's called churnas. And those are helping with supporting the agni, the digestive fire. And then snehan, which is my favorite, which is a Sanskrit word for self-love. And it nourishes and gives softness and strength into the body by giving various kinds of oils that are good for your particular dosha.
It's so good. I think one of the things that I get excited about hearing about this is that we're talking about for a moment this postnatal, kind of moment where the mother is at risk in the Western mind of giving up her identity to become, enslaved to this indentured servitude of the nuclear family and the child, and going into that dynamic of layering on top yet another layer away from herself towards this service to other, and this ownership. This is my child, that she's told, this is your kid. This is your thing, that sense of dominion that gives us then a sense of scarcity. And it's another prison that we can enter, I think. And so I think that major depression that is so typical of the postpartum period is one where you are outsourcing your identity yet again now to another soul that never asked for it. The child didn't expect you to be its God. The child doesn't believe it's yours. The child believes it comes from joy. It comes right from that source that TJ is expressing. And yet our mind has this way, because of that Western dominion, colonialism, we own everything, and therefore we have scarcity, sets into this parenthood moment where we lose ourselves just as much as we lose the child in the mix of this over oppressive state of duty. And so I want that possibility there, but I also want to reflect on the fact that everything you just laid out is how do we then support that nutritionally and through touch and massage and oils and everything you just said. That's exactly what we tell somebody who comes in with stage 4 cancer, is you're going to have to do this journey. And so really what we're talking about is, when we say reparenting, we really have to start at rebirthing. We got to rebirth ourselves, and we got to nurture ourselves as if we were the mother that just gave birth to ourselves. Because I think I've actually physically and spiritually experienced that this year. It took me almost half a century to get to the moment where I could rebirth myself. And it's a compelling idea that we have prisons of the mind that then have impact on our sense of self. And we have to start from the very beginning if we're going to do the deepest work. So before I jump back to reactions, TJ, Susan, I want to hear more from you. But I want to remind the audience that we have a bunch of Q&A going on. There's, it looks like, 60 questions there. You can upvote things that are resonating with you so that we can answer the most, salient ones that resonate with the highest number of you. So go to your Q&A and upvote things that are resonating with you, because we're not going to have time to go through all 60 questions, obviously. But we'll try to grab those salient ones for us. Many of you are wondering if this is recorded, and it is. and it will be released next week. And so I want to reassure you that you're not missing anything if you have to tune out right now. We'll get this recording back out to you, but I appreciate your time as you continue to tune in. But we will get this back out to the world through that path. So upvote some questions. We'll be taking some of that Q&A in the next few minutes, but I want to, right before getting to that, get some more reactions. Susan, you want to cycle back for us there and get some reactions there?
I love how we're all we're playing and interweaving with each other. And when you were talking about stressors, Zach, and how we get ourselves here, it's true, we do get ourselves here, because I learned all the way back in that class, that parenting class I took, is about how to empower children to recognize that we own the problem. And if we can do that as parents, it's so much better for us too. We don't take on our children's stressors, but that permission and that safe container building, that starts with the adult whose job that is. And I thought I got this. I have a teenage son who had a baseball coach who would say things like, well, you've been exposed to it, but apparently you didn't learn it. So all the way back to, had 3 kids, then I'm in therapy 3 days a week with my husband. And my therapist says on the first day, are you willing to take 100% emotional responsibility? And I thought, I'm paying you. Of course I'm willing to take emotional responsibility. Duh. I didn't say that because I've got a good cover. I said, of course. And then as we went through, it didn't take very long before I was stressed by something. And I pointed to my husband. I said, well, I'd be fine if you would change. And that's why she asked me to sign the emotional responsibility agreement, because most of us don't know the first thing about recognizing how we give up our own agency, our own connection to ourselves. If I'm connected to my body, I can feel the intelligence of these emotional alarm systems that are embedded in me to help me to know things. And this is implicit too in the Enneagram and the teachings of it, that we have a mind, of course, beautiful minds. And when they're open, there's amazing things that come through them. And when they're closed, we're judgy and we're all ego. And we have a heart. And when my heart is open, then I am able to perceive things and my connection and attune in a way that I can't when my heart is shut down. And my body is the thing that houses my head and my heart. Like, we can't actually get present if we can't feel and be in our bodies and sense things that are coming through our bodies. So we use very simple sensible meditation techniques to get connected to our bodies, so that these different alarm systems can be informing us. The one where I sit with the 8, 9, and 1 is in the body triad, the belly triad. And my the go-to for 8, 9, and 1 is anger. Well, I didn't think I was angry. I had shut down my anger. I didn't think I was allowed to feel anything after my early childhood trauma was I lost my mom when I was 5. And, that's so significant for how we form. And I didn't know I was angry until I was in prison 30 years later. And I was so stressed about trying to make it a certain way. And when I recognized, wow, that alarm system wasn't allowed to do what it wanted to do. So using the Enneagram as like a map of these ways that we've gotten disconnected so that we can come back. And I think starting with children, and I love this reparenting you're talking about, like, if I'm aware of these things, then I can hold space for somebody else to become aware of them. I talked about kids in our class where their hoods come up. That's true. What's also true is that the Enneagram has become like pop culture, because the next generation is evolving in a way where my 16-year-old gets things that I didn't get till I was 30. He just understands it, right? So they're surpassing us. That's the point. They're supposed to. And when we give them this tool, it helps also my teenage boys to remember that they are inherently lovable. And I have a little 3 who's 6'4", also, Zach, and I should try to show him and mirror back to him his preciousness. And it's the way of our healing our planet, is to start with us and to take in and recognize that he's everybody's child, right? And when we're talking about our students on the inside, they're going to come out. We want them to come out and reintegrate into society. So we better be about healing when we're on the inside. We better be about that.
Amazing. some of the questions coming through here. TJ, jump in there with your reflections there, and then we'll start to kind of put the energy of the audience into this. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love this. And this is at the root to me of how we actually start to shift. And looking at what we're talking about is the point of activation, right? So we've talked about the core wound. We've talked about coming in as whole and perfect, being programmed to believe that we're broken in some way. And for many of us, those wounds are unconscious. And then we project them outward, right? Like, you did this to me, you said this, and that caused me to feel this. And so, Susan, I love you're talking about that 100% accountability. At one point, I woke up and thought, nothing is more painful than 99% surrender or 99% accountability. As long as I believe it's the event that's creating the experience, I miss the opportunity to actually heal. And so when we're looking at self-parenting, it starts with the recognition of what's getting touched, not what touched it. And the way I frame it, we use the word trigger in our culture, and of course in the mental health field and in the addiction field. And in conscious recovery, we've reframed a lot of the language. And one thing we've shifted is we don't use the word trigger, we use the word activation. It's not your words that hurt me, it's that you've touched a wound. And the wound is being touched because it's wanting to heal. And so if I look at not what's happening in the world, but what's getting touched, the reparenting, as Susan said so beautifully, it starts with absolute self-love and compassion, and being the parent to that child. It's okay for me to feel this way, using curiosity and using openness, and then asking a series of questions. What is getting touched? What are the highest possibilities? And I have a process in conscious recovery that's self-parenting, where there are 3 steps, and I'll do it very quickly. 3 things I say to myself when that wound gets touched. And this is what I offer clients. 1, it's okay to feel that way. 2, I'm here for you. Gosh, the I'm here for you is so incredibly powerful. And I think starting with, what are you experiencing? It's okay to feel that way. I'm here for you. Those phrases right there, we can start to have a new relationship with that wound instead of trying to reject it, or with the addictive mindset of trying to find something to soothe that. And the last thing I'll say about this is that's why a lot of the mental health modalities, well-meaning, offer a way for us to soothe or to really fix or change something. But true recovery and true wellness is really about honoring the experience that's present. And if we look at relapse prevention tools, the number 1 tool is to learn how to be present with myself in this moment. It's okay for me to feel that way. You're safe now, and I'm here for you.
Mm-hmm. So good. Other reactions there, Nafisseh, Susan?
My gosh, I'm so moved. I think that I think that last time during our pre-panel discussion, we talked about David Hawkins and the idea of being able to be fully conscious and what that actually means. And I guess my takeaway from that is whether or not we allow all of the energies, or we're calling them emotions and feelings, but really energies that are flowing through us because we are receptacles of receivers in this beautiful life, to allow them to flow through us, to be able to feel them fully, right? Whether it is anger or sadness or things that are not acceptable in some cultures, perhaps happiness is not acceptable, right? And so can we embrace that, our full humanness, so that we allow life to happen, because it's going to happen anyway, with or without us. And can we enjoy the ride, right? This crazy, wild ride of a human experience. Mm-hmm. And support each other through it.
Beautiful. The wild ride. Some of the questions that are being asked, the top one coming through and voted up hard is, how do I maintain boundaries when for myself, when my friends and family are so angry at me for not getting vaccinated? And so it brings to a point, not just a story about vaccination or a question of vaccination, but actually a global phenomenon of polarization that just happened at a scale that we've never witnessed before. 7.8 billion people just went into this narrative and had to negotiate through it. And so as we react to that, what do you guys see as a pathway forward for a highly polarized society that is looking for reasons to be afraid of each other or angry at each other, whatever it is? What is our pathway out of that situation, TJ?
I love this because I think it's fundamental to the shift that's happening. And for me, it's not so much that we are polarized, but we've been conditioned to have polarized thinking. Most of us have been programmed so deeply in the idea of good and bad and right and wrong that we're missing the possibility of what is really wanting to emerge. It's not really about the external. It's really about looking at my mind. Lao Tzu, thousands of years ago, gave us the most profound teaching, and that is the greatest gift I can offer the world is that of my own transformation. So what am I transforming? I'm transforming the mind that believes that it's separate, that believes that this is good and this is bad and this is right and this is wrong. We're swimming in this idea of competition so much that many of us aren't even aware of it. We send people pass away and we say she lost her battle with whatever the disease is. We're swimming, and it's like a fish swimming in water. They can't describe the water, but most of us, or many of us, aren't conscious of this, what we call collective consciousness of competition. So there are 3 steps: awareness, awareness, and awareness. I'm aware of the programming. I'm aware of the greater reality. I honor people. And I realize that the only thing that really needs to change is my own perspective. And I go back to the same thing. And I know, Zach, this is fundamental to you. It's literally the landing moment on your website is we move into curiosity instead of I think I have the answer. And that takes some spiritual work. And for me, it's like I have to look at the reactive impulse, have compassion for it, and then really tend to that. It's a culmination of everything we've been talking about today.
Beautiful. Nafisseh.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's on mute. Yeah, so I think I feel the same. I think one of the questions that came up that I responded to was, why aren't we angry or have animosity towards Western medicine, right? And so I've gone through all of that. And where I am today, whether it has been COVID or not, it's something else that the outer society chooses to be divisive over. It's this realization that I overflow into my family and into my parents and into my community. And my role and my job is really to keep my vibration at a certain level. I take care of this vessel through which light could shine, right? I think that's first and foremost my responsibility, but also to have an open heart for anyone and everyone who wants to express their feelings or their thoughts, to allow for that as well. I think that we can actually heal that relationship, to say that I'm here to be able to listen to you and be open to what you have to say. And I have my own perspective as well, right? And so we're hoping through perhaps openness and through taking care of ourselves, we can continue to forge a relation versus dissension.
Beautiful. Susan, there's a similar question that I think is related to your work here a lot, which is how do I trust in myself while dealing with the feeling of untrustworthy information coming in from the media, from public health officials, all this. How do I deal with that issue of trust in an unstable environment, I guess is another way of saying that. What would you say to that?
You save the doozy for the end here. Well, it's a simple answer, but it's not an easy practice, because how do we trust ourselves? How do we get still enough to hear the answer that's inside of us? If everything that we need is already here, then it really just is a practice for us to put our feet flat on the ground and feel the energy of the earth, feel our connection to something bigger than us. And we know. And I think that this polarization is not about the virus. It's about everything, every other place in my life where I haven't known my own authority and I haven't known my own truth. I haven't trusted my own body. And in some ways, and I hear our students inside say, it's not really my fault. And this is not about abdicating responsibility. It's like lack of consciousness. That's just all of our state. And so I really agree with the point that you're making, TJ, that it takes curiosity and it takes some practice to be able to stay grounded enough in myself to recognize that we all want the same thing. Who on either side of this polarized issue doesn't want their own agency? Who doesn't want to be safe? Who doesn't want to be healthy? Who doesn't want to be connected? We all want the same thing, but we are defaulting to this or that, which is, hello, that's the inside of the diagram. And so in 9 different ways, we're abdicating our own ability to connect to the source of our own answer. And it's like, I've heard you say every which way, Zach, like you would think that this pandemic would be our opportunity to wake up and to see how much we need each other and that the solutions are already here in and among us. And, you know, it's a beautiful question to ponder.
Spectacular. There's another question coming in here of how do we heal our nervous system? And I think, you know, I'm going to answer that briefly, just from kind of a medical aspect. And I want to tie back to you, TJ, to think about that word trust, because there's few things that are probably more important in the journey out of addiction than learning how to trust yourself. And so I want you to reflect on that thing of how do we trust ourselves and some of the tools you guys use there. But before coming back to you on that, how do we heal our nervous system? I think, you know, my own journey into this was important. When I first got this camera in my clinic through William Vitalis, an incredible colleague of mine who's taught me so much about, you know, the real world of science. We call him the director of esoteric sciences that's his title at our center, but we actually refer to him as the unicorn, because this guy brings magic that we just cannot qualify by any metric that we've ever seen in regards to healing. And he's been in this healing modality space for, you know, 35, 40 years of finding the most genius minds. And he gets over to Russia and brings this camera, ultimately under Konstantin Karakov's team. And we're working with his energy camera in my rural clinic, like in the middle of freaking, you know, red state, Virginia area here. And I'm trying to introduce, you know, acupuncture and energy therapies, not because I thought that was necessary. I didn't even know what acupuncture was, literally, when I started my clinic. And people just started coming to me, hearing that I wanted to find a holistic pathway, and I was curious, and I didn't have the answers yet. And so therapists started rushing at me from all kinds of sectors that I had never heard of to join in this mission. And I was so excited to get this camera because it suddenly gave an objective metric on being able to see the human energy field. And one of the striking things that we find about this thing is, number one, when I got imaged on it, I was nearly dead. I was more depleted, yet I still have not seen a single patient in my clinic over the following 12 years from this moment that was more depleted than I was at that moment. And so in the same way that, Susan, you stepped into the prisons to teach something only to find out that you needed to learn something, I stepped out into this world of medicine thinking I could learn. And I spent 17 years trying to get enough information into my head in academia so that I'd be confident enough to meet people in their moment of crisis, whether it be with cancer or depression or whatever it was. And I still didn't have a clue. And so I left 17 years of that and went into rural Virginia to start listening to my patients. And when I saw my image on this camera, to realize that I was, you know, nearly dead, should be dead. I had an energy field of a dead person in that space. It was illogical that I was still alive. I suddenly realized that if I was to survive my own journey, and I barely was, I had major depression, I had suicidal thoughts, it was not a good time in my life. And to realize that I would have to be the first patient healed in this new, you know, holistic clinic I was trying to imagine up was quite a journey. It gave me this sense of heightened importance of everything, of like, I need this more than anybody else. And I think it was that conviction that if you are feeling like everybody is angry at you, it's quite possible that we need to begin at that self state of, what energy am I holding that's allowing me to tell a narrative that everybody's angry at me about my position on an arbitrary thing about a shot or no shot or whatever it is. We need to begin at this journey into evaluating and taking that 100% responsibility of the emotions we're perceiving around us are a narrative that's reinforcing the vibration that we're currently holding. And so as a Mr. Fix-It who is surrounded by problems, I finally had to own that and be like, I gotta stop fixing stuff. And I just want to be a kid again. I want to be that kid who's connected to the preciousness and that sense of, radiance and the value that is that number 3 in that reformed state. That's what I want to be. But it took me half a century of being buried in the other space and outsourcing all my beliefs about who I'd become. So TJ, how do we find our way back into that? How do we trust into that system that we're seeing laid out in the Enneagram to find self to the point where we can overcome what seems like, addiction, honestly. We just need to recognize for a moment, it is a mountain that seems insurmountable so often in our minds and experiences.
Wow, I just wanted to pause. I want to pause for a moment and just feel into the gratitude for everything you just shared, because it's so incredibly powerful. And I wanted to pause with that for a moment. And it's interesting that we're talking about trust, because in conscious recovery, when I identify the 3 root causes, then the question is, what do we do with it? And it starts with, and Zach, I don't know if you've read it in Conscious Recovery yet, it starts with safety and trust. And Susan, I know that you and I have talked about confirmation bias, right? And I would love to do a show with you about that sometime. And for anyone who's not aware of what that means, I think most of us are. It's pretty simple, and it's really what Zach is speaking to. When I am holding the frequency of something, I actually will see it everywhere. So when I believed I was unlovable, I was vibrating with the frequency of unlovability. And it could be true that I attracted people to confirm it. But even more than that, that's literally all I could see. And so we're looking at consciousness being an algorithm. And what's happening with social media and what used to be mainstream media, which is now biased media, quite frankly, right? If you turn on one channel about a news story, you hear a totally different point of view than supposedly the exact same story. And so this is the great news. This to me is it's not the terrible news, it's the wonderful news, because look, we're all projecting what we consider to be the truth. And a wise person once said, the only way to actually speak truth is to speak in paradox. So it is true that there are these seeming polarizations happening. And it is true on one level that I can't trust what I see on social media because of the algorithm, right? I'm getting a totally different story than someone, maybe in the next room over. I'm in a hotel right now. Someone else might be getting a totally different version, which is why I unplugged from a lot of it, because I didn't want that to be in my consciousness. So that's a long way of saying, how do we actually shift this? I shift this by looking at what I want to anchor my trust in. And we've all spoken to it. It's moving back into the awareness of the essential beingness of who and what we are. We came in inherently trusting the divinity, the spark of divinity, the essential beingness, the true nature, the Buddha nature. And really life's journey is about that, not about all of these out picturings, because I think, I can't remember who said it, but nothing can be seen as negative from all points of view. We all have a point of view. And rather than saying I'm right or wrong, can I be curious about where this originated? How do I start to heal this? And then I set out on a journey. And this is what I'll say. The last thing I'll say is, I have a very simple formula now. And that is, what gets created when I blank, whatever the blank is. What gets created when I see the world as broken? What gets created as I see the world as a kind and loving place? I move out of the good, bad, right, wrong, and then just start to look at, like, wow, I'm holding this projector, and it's the lens, it's the piece of lint on the lens that I'm seeing in every situation. And it's my job to clear that lens and to return to a place of wholeness.
Wow. Closing thoughts, Nafisseh, and then Susan.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have to tell you, TJ, I have you on full screen and I see that beautiful light shining right through your eyes. Your eyes, I saw this baby the other day. I was in the farmer's market in Kauai, and I just couldn't stop looking into her eyes. And same as yours, it's the same, right? We all have these windows into our own souls and into the souls of others. And I honor you for all the work that you're doing in the recognition of this sacred soul that we all hold. And I think that through this work that we're doing here, as well as just continuing to shine our light, we will be able to get to a place where the paradigm shift has completed itself and we can feel fully connected. And I look forward to that journey.
Amazing. Susan.
Just incredible to be in this space of self-remembering. And I feel like as we've been able to go to all kinds of places, we keep coming back to the same kind of core thing, is that all human behavior is just an attempt to feel loved. And when we know ourselves to be loved, then all we see is love, right? And I think that that takeaway about how everything outside of us is reflecting some aspect of us, that's the way, that's also true in the positive, right? So all that you're saying, Nafiseh, about TJ is your own reflection. And that's the part that I feel too about you and Zach, and this entire listenership, I think, is sitting in that same reverberation. So I just feel full of gratitude, and thank you for bringing all these beautiful hearts together to speak to that same one truth.
Awesome. And we want to recognize all of you on. We thank you for the couple thousand of you that have been hanging in there for 2 hours with us here in your time here. And we thank you for the tens of thousands that have signed up and will be watching this on your own time zones and in your own calendar space that you have and joining us. And I just want to recognize each of you and in the context of what we've just been speaking through and listening and learning from these incredible minds and hearts that are here on this panel. If you have a child that is suffering from a mental health condition right now, if you as an individual are suffering from a mental health condition right now, I want you to meditate for a moment on on that Enneagram. And to get started, you just have to go online. You can take the little Enneagram quizzes to like kind of where you likely fit into that puzzle 1 through 9 there. And then read those 3 traits that you came into this world, or read the traits of your child. Or if your child's too young to participate in this, read all 9 of them and remind yourself there is not a single soul on that ring that I wouldn't honor and know. And as Nafisseh said so beautifully about Ayurveda, thousands and thousands of years old, Enneagram, thousands and thousands of years old, they're both recognizing that your child is at this second whole and healed and capable of the whole journey. You are whole and healed and capable of being seen and realizing ultimately that you are enough. You are in this moment a glorious, complete being that may be layered with all kinds of beliefs and programming and polarization and all the reality that might be settled upon you. But the exciting thing is that the fix-it Zach can't come along and fix you. The exciting thing is you have nothing to be fixed. You are whole, you are complete, you have a resonance within you that's going to recognize TJ's joy, that's going to recognize my sense of radiance, that's going to recognize Nafisseh's sense of, that incredible ability to show us the big picture there, that's going to give us the ability to keep moving through these layers. I love the intensity of number ones, right? As soon as you said that, I was thinking of a friend of mine. I love the intensity of the 1. And then you finish with 9 that just says it's all connected, And so 1 through 9 is about the intensity of being alive, the intensity of seeing our potential at the 1. And then the conclusion of the matter, that crowning moment of the Enneagram at 9 of, oh my God, we are all whole. And so just as we are fractals of the microbiome to the macro ecosystems that we create around us, just as we start to express a macro life from the micro stories that we tell about ourselves, we can change it all in a moment in recognition of the wholeness. You have begun whole, and interestingly, an energy field cannot be destroyed. Human flesh can be. We can carry scar, we can carry wounds, we can carry all of that. But what we're talking about in this 2 hours is the most exciting global health education summit we've done to date, because we are moving so close to the original wound of humanity, which is we came to see ourselves as separate. And for that, we have expressed a society that is doing exactly what it's doing. It is sucking life out of earth. It is polarizing. It is inflammatory. It is angry, all of these things as the original wound. And so what we are talking about here literally are tools for you to begin healing a human journey that is full of trauma, full of the attachment disorder, everything else that's been, mentioned here. But the excitement is the human journey can be long if we take that pathway and ignore the immediate pathway of the soul that remains untouched, the energy field that cannot be wounded within you. There is an ancient being within you, an organized energy that has all remembrance, has all the knowledge. And what we are asking and inviting you into is just a moment of silence, of gratitude, and just reverence for each of you. You showed up right now. It has to be with great purpose, because there's been 200,000 other years that you could have shown up in human Homo sapien history. There could have been, 20 million years that you showed up in Homo erectus's history, and you showed up freaking right now at the tipping point of, will we extract and destroy and create the sixth extinction? Or will we step up into a new state of metamorphosis occur because we have created enough stress that there's enough potential energy to work with to absolutely transform who we are? And that can happen in a split second. No journey out of like carbon credits and all the BS you hear about how we're going to dig our way out of this hole. No, it's going to happen in a split second, or a series of split seconds in which we deeply connect back to an unharmed, unwounded energy field within each of us to express that unimprisoned sense of self that we see in the Enneagram. And we come to trust that resonance within us that speaks of a beauty that is simply an expression of the intelligence of nature itself. And so all of that far-flung language and knowledge and vision, how the hell is that going to look like in your life? What are you going to do to move towards that? And I found that path in farmers' fields. I found that path stepping out of clinics, away from the cancer patient, and starting to stand in fields and actually watch farmers farm. Watch their passion for their compost pile. Watch their passion for growing things instead of killing things, as they did a decade ago when they were chemical farming, and now they're engaged in life. They're engaged every morning. They wake up and say, what can I create? What can I foster more biodiversity in my soil system? And they're so excited to see what happens. They're curious again, and they're inventive minds. And 10 years ago, they were depressed and suicidal farmers about to lose the fourth generation farm because they had become so reductionist in their effort to kill everything to preserve a little bit of life left. And so we have this opportunity right now to become regenerative ourselves and to start to carry a new resonance where we give up the old identities of fixing it and being resilient. That's a very dangerous identity. If you say, well, I'm resilient every day, well, then some catastrophic thing is going to happen to you every day for you to maintain your identity. And so don't get stuck in this. Welcome in the possibility that the beauty that you're seeing in Nafiseh and TJ and Susan and their work is actually a reverberation of you. You know this work. You know what it is that you showed up here to do. And I believe you showed up to see another human being and the soul within it. And if you could do that for a split second, the resonance, the shift, the manifestation will take us there. And so what I would invite you to heal your neurological system right now and to replug in your mental identity into your conscious identity at the soul level is get out in nature. It is a perfect pathway. And so go out into a new environment, onto a new path, literally walk a new path that you've never walked before, and go to a waterfall, go to a mountaintop, go to an ocean, walk on a new path that you have never set foot on, and just witness the beauty. Watch that sunset or that sunrise and realize that nobody ever had to teach you what beauty looks like. It's because you resonate with that. It's because you are that. You are a beautiful soul that is overwhelming to be in the presence of. And that's so overwhelming to other egoic minds that are also split, that are also imprisoned, that are also there, that they're going to start to push away from you when you start to express your beauty. And so you will purify your environment. You will detox your environment. You will become trustworthy to self when you start to recognize the beauty of nature and realize you are resonating with it because you are that beauty. and we can all be witness to you and tell you you are enough. We're so grateful you came right now to be part of this community, to be part of the rise, and I am just so honored to be in this resonance chamber with you today. TJ Woodward, Nafisseh Soroudi, Susan Olesek, thank you guys so much. You have shifted me this week. You've shown me something more of myself, more of my potential, and the love that comes with it. Say something to the audience to get us out of here. I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you, each of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amen, Zach. Thank you so much.
So powerful. Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Thank you all for joining us. We're so honored that you've given the time to it. We honor your journey, whether it be full of clouds or sunshine right now. It is your journey. We honor it, and we would love to be part of your life as you move forward. Find your beauty, resonate with the beauty that you maybe haven't been able to see recently, and you'll find an abundance of love, because the reaction to seeing beauty is the experience of love, and that will take us back into a state of abundance where we realize there is no lack. You are loved, for you are beautiful, and we can go walk away from this experience together with a new sense of hope for a world that can metamorph quickly and immediately in that recognition of who we are. So thank you for the tools. Please join us on the Global Health Education series at the website, zachbushmd.com will get you there, and then under the knowledge page, because we have a lot of resources for you to find these great people and minds here and their projects. You'll find the Enneagram Prison Project and everything there. I love the other project that you're involved with there. That's a sister project there, which is the 9 Prisons, 1 Key tool that you've got there. So we'll have links to that information on the Enneagram. Thank you, Susan, for that. TJ, we have a whole host of contacts for him with his books and his educational curriculum and everything else. For Nafiseh, we're excited to bring you connection with her so that you can understand how her consulting work is impacting industries in health, consciousness, and beyond, and how to find that soul of a mission that really will light up people. So thank you, all 3 of you. We're so grateful for that. For those of you that are looking for help on a health journey and you feel like you need a mirror, we welcome you to dive into the Journey of Intrinsic Health. That's also available on Zach Bush MD. The Journey of Intrinsic Health begins in January. There might be a few spots left there, but we've already opened up the next modules in March and beyond. So join us there. It's an 8-week journey. There's a coach there that joins you in that pathway into finding that. So if you feel like you need more community on that healing journey that you're on, we don't want you to feel alone. You are joined in it. If that one's not working for you as far as the time commitment or the resources for that one-on-one experience with your coach, then we have uncoached material too available on Commune. And there's going to be content there for you to dive into the Commune courses of vital health, or just a different way of looking at the way in which we could look at nutrition and things like heart disease and beyond. So diving into the Commune course at a much lower price point, because it's content that you'll take more didactically without the coaching experience. But it is an entry point for you to continue the deep dive on understanding your connection to nature and how nature can express its beauty through you. And then, of course, so grateful for Farmer's Footprint and the whole team with Project Biome as we start to understand that pivot point. We are excited to be supported by the global community. If you're looking for end-of-year giving and philanthropy for your own financial purposes, or perhaps just because you have passion for it, we feel that with great excitement, we've been able to really pivot a whole industry's awareness of regenerative agriculture and the importance of return to nature, and a remembrance of where we've come through from indigenous wisdoms and the like to where we are today, and a pathway back to that through Farmer's Footprint. So support there at farmersfootprint.us is much appreciated as we go into this new year of new programming and new grander projects that are there to impact our food system and understanding how it impacts the minds and hearts of our children there. And then finally, just thank you for this program, because you guys brought it to us. It's your personal support that has brought the Global Health Education Summit to us over this last year and a half. It's impacted me greatly. It's brought in the opportunity for us to connect you with great thinkers like you've seen today. And it really has been a community-run project that I think is a reaction to the isolationism that we've seen in the last 2 years demanded of us, we are responding with, no, we're going to get together and we're going to do a deep dive on who we are, where we come from, what is the biology, what is the biochemistry, what is the biophysics of life itself, and what are we here to do at this moment. So thank you for supporting the Global Health Education Summit. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Nafiseh. Thank you, TJ, again. It's been a powerful day, and I wish all of you the healthiest of holidays and end of year